I wasn't coping well. I remember just feeling very lonely and not really being able to explain it to anyone. I was very, very young the first time that I started thinking about suicide or wanting to die. Welcome to Voices of Deconversion. We share the inspirational stories of deconversion told by former Christians who are now atheist or agnostic. Our stories remind us we're in it together. They encourage us as we discover who we are and help us to embrace who we become.
Welcome back for episode 21. This is part 1 of my conversation with my wife, Krissy. Krissy and I became friends over 20 years ago. We've been married for the last 16 years. I've heard Krissy's story many times. Having this conversation with her again, and then having to go back through and listen to it a second time when I was editing, it really hit me how alone, vulnerable, and scared she felt growing up. When she ran into difficulty in school, she internalized it. When she witnessed conflict between her parents, when bad things happened to her, she internalized that, and she devoted herself to becoming a better person and a better Christian. She was eager to please her parents and to do the right thing. As you'll see, the sincerity, kindness, and courage that make her such a great person today, those qualities were present in her life early on. She discusses some difficult experiences that she had that involve sexual harassment. If that happens to be a subject that's sensitive for you as a listener, we just wanted to let you know before the episode started. Krissy came through some real difficulties as a young girl, and I came away from the interview having even more respect and admiration for her. And now, my interview with Krissy. So I'm here with my wife, Krissy, and Krissy is going to share her story of deconversion today. I guess we're just going to go ahead and jump right in. So, Krissy, what term do you prefer to use when you describe kind of your beliefs about religion or God?
So I think atheist most closely represents what I believe about religion or the supernatural. I don't believe in any god or deity. That's not to say there couldn't be something out there, but that's just my personal belief. I like the phrase humanism, and I like using the phrase humanist to describe myself because I think it represents a worldview. So I think I'd go by both. Okay.
Well, in what ways was Christianity a part of your childhood?
We didn't go to church very regularly, but Christianity was a big part of my childhood. We talked about it a lot. We prayed before meals, prayed together. I always knew I was a Christian, and I remember as a girl, young girl, trying to remember to pray every day, and I had Bible stories that we read, and I had my own Precious Moments Bible, and it was a big part of our daily living, but we didn't go to church.
Okay, so sporadic church attendance?
Yeah. We were sort of a Christmas Eve, Easter, and occasionally spread out throughout the year. One thing I remember having a lot of nightmares when I was younger, and I remember that I really remember a firm belief that this is going to go dark all of a sudden. I remember having a firm belief that, you pray to Jesus to protect you. I think I had, like a lot of children, a lot of people you've interviewed, they express, fear of Satan and the devil. And I remember, I'd have nightmares, and then I would think that it was the devil trying to get me or trick me. And I remember just being really afraid almost every night that if I didn't pray or I didn't protect myself with Jesus, that, Satan was going to try to get me. And I don't remember what I expected Satan to do to me. I just know that I was just afraid a lot when I went to bed and feeling like I needed to remember to pray to keep myself safe.
And then what else about your childhood? So as you grew older, did your faith change in any way?
Christianity for me led to a lot of guilt. I knew that I wasn't living the way that no person ever really is. No one's perfect. And so you have a lot of expectations that, you don't pretty much do anything wrong. And when you do, you feel guilt and shame about that. And so I kind of feel like I grew up with a lot of guilt and shame about a lot of things. as I got a little bit older, I got a little bit more, I guess, rebellious. Probably around 14 or 15, I started to just hang out with, be more interested in boys and hang out with, kids that maybe weren't living perfectly the way that I thought that I should.
What kind of things did you do that made you feel guilty?
We skipped school here and there. I think I had a lot of guilt and shame around flirting with boys. I think for some reason, I thought that was really bad. And then, I listened to secular music and watched movies I probably didn't think I should have, and just
so even though you kind of had this identity that you were a Christian, and you guys weren't super devout. In other words, you didn't go to church all the time, but even in spite of that, you still had a very strong sense of guilt about being good and not being bad.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think another important part of my faith that influenced my faith quite a bit was, my dad, my parents were split when I was an infant, and I didn't really know my dad that well, and I think I always liked the idea of a Heavenly Father who was always watching over me. I think I viewed Christianity as like something that would protect me. I remember just feeling very scared a lot, scared of the devil. I don't know what made me fearful of that, but I think like a lot of people that you've interviewed, I had a real fear of Satan and demons, and then, I had the frequent nightmares. And
what do you think that is?
Well, there's some early childhood trauma, I think, that I experienced. And so that probably led to a lot of the nightmares. And as a child, you don't really understand, how stress might influence your nightmares. But I remember just thinking, there's always this, battle between good and evil, and I think I sort of internalized that, and I internalized religion or Christianity or being a Christian as I was just, there was always this sort of internal good and evil within myself, and I was always fighting the kind of evil within myself, and that's kind of the way I saw it. And I remember,
even when you were little?
Even when I was little. And
like how old?
As early as I can remember.
Okay.
Prayers.
So
I
really
remember.
Young.
Yeah,
I remember
remember
fighting the evil inside of you.
Right, and just feeling like, I'm just feeling like I had to remember to pray about and ask for forgiveness for everything I did wrong. And I remember, feeling scared if I fell asleep before I thought of any, everything. So I might have gotten mad at my sister and called her a name or something, and I just would feel the pressure to remember every single thing I did and ask for forgiveness, or else I wasn't safe. That's kind of how I felt.
You weren't safe.
Yeah, like I wasn't, like I wasn't going to heaven.
So if you fall asleep and you forgot to ask forgiveness for something, you thought maybe you wouldn't go to heaven if you...
Right.
Okay.
So number one, no wonder I had nightmares.
Yeah, that's kind of scary.
But and as a kid, you kind of you're trying to remember everything, and you're trying to stay awake and pray about everything you possibly can. And I remember just falling asleep and then waking up and being, oh no, I forgot to say amen.
That must have been really stressful.
Yeah, it was. It was pretty stressful. But on the reverse side, I think I really liked the idea of having a Heavenly Father that cared about me and was looking out for me. But it almost felt like it was kind of in order to receive those blessings, you have to remember to, ask for forgiveness for everything.
And so you mentioned that your dad and your mom split when you were young. And so what kind of relationship did you have with your dad?
I didn't know him very well. I think we would go a few years without seeing him, and we might see him on a weekend visit trip to his mom's, my grandmother. I think I was about 5th grade. 4th grade, we started visiting him. My sister and I started visiting him regularly on the weekends, or every other weekend. And even then, he was not a very open man. He wasn't very affectionate. So I never felt really close to him. I felt certainly a sense of obligation to love him and care about him, but he, and he would try to do fun things, but there was always conflict between him and my mom, and they would use us quite a bit as a means. He would use us as a means to kind of get even with her and hurt her, I think. And so that, just being in the middle of all that conflict was really difficult.
What kinds of things do you remember him doing to try to, I guess, was it like he would try to get leverage, or he would try to just get even with your mom?
I mean, he did a lot of the typical things that, like, dysfunctional parents do when they hate each other. He would say mean things about my mom, and then if we would tell her what he said or ask her about what he said, of course that would make her really upset, and it would just cause conflict. He also refused to pay child support. It didn't matter how much my mom was struggling. He worked in construction, so he would quit a job as soon as the state caught up with him. So they'd garnish his wages for a paycheck, and that's all we'd see for months.
Wow.
Yeah. So
that really impacted your life growing up with your mom. So that was your relationship with your dad. So with your mom not giving child support all the time and being a single parent, that must have been a pretty, you tell me, what kind of a childhood was that? What kind of an experience was that, having a single mom who wasn't getting, the child support she should have got?
Yeah. Yeah, it was really difficult. My family was out of state, and so it was really just my mom taking care of...
You mean your extended family?
My extended...
So it was just your mom and you and your sister that were here in...
the Northwest, yeah. And so she didn't really have any support. And so we were constantly struggling financially. I mean, it was just an ongoing battle. And
you've told me that you guys used to, sometimes when you were looking for, like, grocery money, your mom would have you guys looking through couches for change. Yeah,
I mean, we really lived paycheck to paycheck. And so, whenever we did get those garnished wages, it was a huge deal. It really helped a lot. And he did something weird. I remember he would oftentimes buy my sister and I boys toys or clothes. So my mom would ask him to help support and buy us some clothes for school. And so his response was to go buy us some boys' jeans. And he knew that my mom wouldn't let us wear boys' clothes. And it was a way to get her to stop asking him for help. So I think it was really, really hard for her. And she has, she worked really hard to get to where she's at. And, but it was a constant challenge growing up.
Yeah, that's a difficult and very stressful environment. And then on top of that, when you go to bed every night, you're afraid that you're not purging the evil from your soul.
Yes. I was a very, very bad little child.
Oh, my goodness. No, you weren't. Yeah, but that's how you felt.
Yeah, oh yeah.
As a kid. Yeah. That's sad.
Yeah.
But you mentioned that your faith kind of changed in the sense that, like, you kind of started noticing boys, and you would skip class sometimes in, like, junior high and stuff like that. I guess, what were some other ways that your faith, that's a childlike faith that you had, and a childlike spirituality, the black and white thinking and the good versus evil, and I'm a good girl, I'm a bad girl kind of thing. And so how did that change as you become an adolescent and you got into high school?
Well, I think that, with the increased stress for my mom, she was constantly trying to, I think she was always trying to have us live, I guess, the standard of living was always that it was a 2-person income or 2-person household. My mom always didn't want us to suffer anything or miss out on anything because we didn't have a dad. And that led to I think the constant financial strain, and I think the constant stress, it led to some really extreme, like, health conditions for her, and some real extreme stress for her, and it caused a lot of conflict within our family. And so it was around 5th grade, my mom bought a house, and she she actually bought it from my dad's parents. And she was really excited to be getting us into a good school and to a good neighborhood. And what she didn't know was what a fixer-upper it was and how many serious problems it had, plumbing issues. And I just remember there was one thing after another. There was even foundation issues. I mean, there was a huge backyard that was really difficult to keep up because it was on a hill. And she just couldn't do all that on her own without any support, and the money wasn't there to constantly be fixing plumbing issues, and so it was extremely stressful for her, that with my sister and I both going through puberty, and I think kind of that brings its own challenges. It created a lot of tension and conflict in our house.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, that sounds like
what
a lot of teenagers go through just in the teenage years, and
yeah.
And then the added stress of having a single parent who is struggling to
Right.
kind of keep things together while she's with the house and stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
But how did your faith change, or how did it?
Well, I think during all this stress and trauma, I relied a lot on my faith to get me through. So I really believed firmly that God cared about me, and that he was looking over us, he was looking out for us, and that he would keep us safe. So there was a strong belief that God would provide and take care of us. And then on the other hand, it was me wanting to fit in at school,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe hang out with people that maybe I didn't think I should. I'd swear,
Mm-hmm.
all those horrible bad things. And
Yeah.
so I kind of had this conflict going on within myself of being, am I being a good Christian, or clearly I didn't feel like I was being a good enough Christian.
Well, at what point did it change? Because I know
Mm-hmm.
you really well.
Mm-hmm.
I know that your faith kind of took a step up, and it kind of got more serious in, I think, junior high school.
So there was sort of a perfect storm of just really sort of horrific things, I guess, that happened. I had a crush on a boy in junior high, and so I was kind of flirting with him, and I think that's where the rumor started. But there were some rumors that went around about me, I guess. I don't know. So in junior high, I think I was in 7th grade, I was kind of discovering boys, and I was flirting with this boy in my homeroom class, and he ended up telling some of his friends something about me, but it gave them the impression that I was fair game. And so I ended up getting really severely sexually harassed, and it got to the point where I was afraid to walk home from school because they'd leave notes in my locker about what they were going to do to me, and drawing pictures and illustrations, and I had to walk home by myself. And I remember just sitting in the bathroom, being scared to leave. I'd wait a long time till I didn't hear anyone, and then I'd try to go home. But then they'd also grab me in the halls. So it would be a group of boys, and I wouldn't know who grabbed me. And then around the same time, a family member on my dad's side, sort of, I don't know how to describe it, but sexual harassment. He made a joke about my chest and pulled my jacket back so that he could see my chest, and then he kind of laughed about it to another family member. And I remember just being filled with so much shame and embarrassment. And then I think when I tried to tell someone about what had happened, they pretty much said, well, you shouldn't have worn that then, or, they blamed me for it. And I wasn't wearing anything promiscuous. It was just a jean jacket and so I don't think, looking back, I don't think there was anything I did that could have triggered that behavior, but, or with the boys too, I don't think I did anything that was so crazy that it merited that kind of treatment.
Yeah.
But I internalized that quite a bit. So that was, for me, it's sort of, I had so much guilt and shame, and I really did believe that if I had behaved differently, it wouldn't have happened to me. And then I really started to think, okay, I have to turn my life over to God, because I don't want this to happen again. I'm not living a good Christian life. If I had never, flirted with that boy or talked to him, and if I had been a good Christian girl, none of this would have ever happened.
So
and
you believed that the way you were dressed was the reason that your family member was basically sexually harassing you.
Right. And then also the boys at school. I just believed that it was because I wasn't being a good enough Christian. If I had been more devoted to God, then I would have been kept safe from that kind of thing. And so I immediately, right around the same time, we started going to your uncle's church with you and your sister and your family. And
because you knew my sister.
Yep.
Just so people kind of know background, you were friends with my sister, so our families sort of had a connection there. Yeah. I knew of you when you were in junior high.
Because I was really good friends with your sister.
Yeah, but I didn't really know you well. And then as you started to go to my uncle's churches, when I started to get to know you as a friend, and we started to, we were just in the same youth group and stuff. So we were just in hanging out. The
evangelical or fundamentalist faith it's kind of all consuming when you get involved in that movement. It can be kind of cult-ish. But I went, head first. I was just very devoted, and I really did think I was on the right path. I felt like, okay, this is what God was trying to tell me. This is what I needed to do. This is what I should be doing.
And something about the church, you can't put your finger on it now, but something about that church or that movement really kind of resonated with you, and you felt like this is the right place to be. I want to be here.
Right. Well, I do think that the charismatic movement, like anything bad happening in your life, is a sign that God wants you to return to Him. So any traumatic thing, any hardship, anything like that, it just means you need to recommit yourself to Jesus. And I had already asked Jesus into my heart when I was younger, but I remember just feeling a really strong conviction that I needed to recommit my life to Jesus. And then of course there was all the emotional, the praying in tongues and being slain in the Spirit. And, for people who don't know what that is, I guess it's just the charismatic movement. They believe that the Holy Spirit will come down on you and you'll feel its presence and you'll have some very bizarre, physical responses. And, I really did buy it hook, line, and sinker. I thought that I was being slain in the Spirit, and it was also a safe place for me to be around, men and boys my own age. It was, kind of non-threatening. We were all there for Jesus, and it kind of met some of those needs, some of those safety needs, I guess.
Yeah. And if I were to ask you what God meant to you personally, you probably would say that He was someone that made you feel safe.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was that Heavenly Father who, was seeing every challenge I was going through and every struggle, and He cared, and He had a plan. I think it was really important for me to feel like there was a reason for all, because, there was a lot going on at home as well. Like I said, my mom was under a lot of pressure, and there was a lot of conflict at home, and I was doing really poorly in school. I have a learning disability, and so I hadn't really understood what that meant, and I didn't have the supports I needed at school. And so I just felt like there was just a lot of struggle and hardship. And Christianity, Jesus, it meant that there was a purpose to it all. Mm. Being a Christian meant that God had a plan for me. And every tear I shed, He knew, and He was just shaping me into what He wanted me to be. And so you have to go through the fire clay has to be put in the fire to be molded into what He wanted. So
basically, you were growing up, vulnerable and feeling unsafe and needing a father and needing a parent figure in that sense. And it gave your difficult kind of experiences a purpose. Like, you were suffering for a reason. You were going through these bad things for a reason.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It wasn't just meaningless. And then you said that God was someone who made you feel safe, and He was a father figure. What else did God mean to you personally?
What God meant to me, I think there was a lot going on. I think the way to sum it up would just be to say I wasn't coping well. I remember just feeling very lonely and not really being able to explain it to anyone. I was very, very young the first time that I started thinking about suicide or wanting to die. I think I was probably 5th grade.
And what made you feel that way as a 5th grader? I know you said you felt lonely, but
well,
what
like I
was
said,
causing the loneliness?
there was a lot of conflict at home, and I think I just didn't have the coping mechanisms to be able to deal with it. I didn't feel I guess I didn't feel as a child, I didn't feel wanted. I felt more like a nuisance. I think I knew from a very young age that my dad didn't want us. He didn't want, you know.
He didn't want you as children?
No.
Like, you didn't want to have... He didn't want to be there.
He didn't want to support us. He didn't want to pay child support. He didn't want to help. And then you know, as a kid, you can kind of tell when he wouldn't show up a lot of times, so we would be ready and have our bags packed, and he just wouldn't show up.
Sad.
Yeah, and I remember my mom just being so frustrated because, you know...
Yeah, it breaks your heart.
He wouldn't even call. And so it was just, he wouldn't say anything. And so, and I think there was that. And then I think with all the stress that my mom was going through, she just, at that time, she wasn't available to us. And there was a lot of conflict at home, and I just didn't know, as a young girl, I just didn't know how to deal with it.
I was just thinking about how your dad, in some ways, him being in and out of your lives was far worse than him just being an absent father who was never around, because it's almost like he's toying with your emotions and he's playing with your heart. You know? I don't know, did you go through times when you felt closer to your dad and like, okay, like, this is my dad and I love my dad, and then other times where you were heartbroken?
No, I never felt love for my dad. I felt a sense of obligation, like I should love him. I felt guilt that I didn't love him. And it actually caused a lot of conflict, because my sister, you know, he had said something mean about my mom again, and it resulted in a pretty big fight, and my sister said I don't want to, you know, she didn't want to go over and see him anymore. Well, I was too scared to tell him that. I was too afraid of hurting his feelings, and so I continued to go over to his house probably for another year on the weekends, just me. And I think it really hurt my mom too, that I would go and continue to see him even though he was, you know, said those mean things about her, and so there was the conflict there. I feel like that kind of built up a wedge between my mom and I, and I just remember just not being able to make either of them happy, and not ever feeling like I was I guess good enough. And so I'm sure that was where some of the depression came from, and the sadness and the fear.
Yeah, as a kid, if that child feels like they can never please their parents, then I can really see why it would cause for you depression and the sense of hopelessness, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, continuing to go over there, it was lonely, it was boring, you know, I didn't have anything to do, my sister wasn't there, so I didn't have anyone to play with, and I could tell that they didn't necessarily want me there, but then telling them that I didn't want to go over there, I didn't want to hurt their feelings. Mm-hmm. I was afraid of that, and then the whole time, you know, I think it really did hurt my mom that I continued to go. And, you know, looking back, I don't think that should have been the response. I think it would have been helpful if someone had thought, maybe, how's Krissy feeling about this whole thing? But I think that really wasn't where, you know, that wasn't really what they were thinking, either of them, at the time. I think they were really thinking about their feelings. And so I guess all of that being said, I think that when I did that perfect storm of the depression that started at a young age, when I was 7th grade, my dad, when I was at some point, I had called my dad and said, I can't come over and see you anymore. He was a kind of a chain smoker, and he smoked in the house, and I had asthma, and there had been a few times where I'd come over to his house and then come home and ended up in the hospital from asthma attacks.
Really?
And he didn't believe that I had asthma. He thought that my mom was making it up. And so finally, I you know, my mom was like, if you don't want to go over there anymore, you have to tell him. And I remember just being terrified and having to call him and tell him that I didn't want to see him anymore. I couldn't go over there anymore because of the smoking, and I didn't see him.
How did that conversation go? Do you remember?
Well, I called, and it was my stepmom.
And how old were you?
I was probably maybe 5th or 6th grade.
Okay. Young girl having to call and confront her dad, who doesn't seem to like her anyway. But
I knew it would make him mad.
You want to please.
Yeah, and I knew I'd be hurting him, and I was terrified of hurting him. So I had to call him and tell him, and luckily for me, my stepmom picked up the phone, and I told her, and then I didn't hear from him again for another 2 years.
Really?
Yeah.
2 whole years before he even said a word to you.
Not a word, not a birthday card, not a Christmas card, nothing.
Wow.
So then when he did come, it was 7th grade, around the same time that all that other stuff was going on, he did show up, and he just came and he had his new phone number on the back of a matchbook, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "I'm moving to Nevada. If you want to talk to me or get a hold of me, this is my number." And he just left. And that was the last time I had heard of him. And
he just stopped by one day, like knocked on the door, handed you the matchbox, said that, and then left?
Yeah. Yeah, it was a weird experience. And
wow.
I was terrified.
Of what?
Him.
In that moment?
He was angry. Yeah, he was really angry.
So he was leaving to spite you, maybe.
I don't know. I think he had gotten his wages garnished again. The state did kind of catch up with him every once in a while, and I know in Nevada that he was at less risk of that happening. I don't know if it's true, but I think back in the 90s they didn't have the same, you know, it was harder to catch people in Nevada. At least that's what I've been told. So yeah, that was the last time I ever saw him. And then he died when I was in, 17. We can get to that later, but so I never saw him again after that.
That's really sad.
Yeah. So with all that being said, I guess my faith really, it carried me through. When I remember having periods of depression where I would just pray that God would just let me die, and just as a very young girl and throughout early high school, just wishing that God would just let me be done. I was just tired, and I was always too scared to do anything like that because I didn't want to go to hell. So I had just gone through a really hard time. I was really struggling in school. I was getting more involved in the church, but it wasn't necessarily alleviating the hardships that were going on at home and at school. I remember it was my junior year, and I remember reading a book called Hind's Feet on High Places, and I remember the story. It's an allegory of this girl who is deformed, and there's a shepherd, and the shepherd is going to make her whole and take away her deformities and make her beautiful, but she has to go through this really difficult path.
And what's the name of the
Much Afraid.
So her name is Much Afraid.
Yes.
Yeah. So you are identifying with this
very
character.
much so.
A lot.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I really did believe that God had led me to this book because he was explaining why I had gone through so many hard things in my life. And and I remember reading, and I remember just reading it and just crying and thinking, okay, this is it. God has a plan for me. All this suffering, all this trauma, it was for a reason. And she eventually does make it through. She has to go through all these difficult obstacles, and it's scary and hard for her. But then in the end, she ends up meeting the shepherd and getting her dreams come true. The shepherd remakes her, and she's whole. And
the shepherd is God, and
yes,
he's
Jesus.
Yeah.
And so I remember just really believing that all the suffering that I'd gone through was worthwhile, and God was just making me who he wanted me to be, and I had to go through those hard times to get there. And of course now, thinking back, I think that's really horrible. No child should have to go through that kind of trauma so that she can be just the way that God wants her.
Right.
But at the time, I needed to hear that. I needed to believe that there was a purpose for all that. And so I read that, and then shortly after I read that book, and I just kind of accepted that this is kind of where I'm at right now. my dad died, and I had just
Okay.
turned 17, and I took a month off of school, and it was supposed to be a week, but it kind of another week and another week, and then I quickly realized that I probably wouldn't graduate on time because I had taken that month off, and so I decided to do Running Start, which is it's a program where you can go to college
While you're in high school.
while you're in high school, and so that's how I graduated on time, and that was a really I was able to move out shortly after that. I moved out of the house with my sister, and for me and I was also going to church, and right around that time you came home from college, and we started spending a lot of time together, and I remember thinking, when we started dating, I remember thinking that this is part of my promised land. You were part of God's plan for me. That after all that, and it made sense because, it was the first time I'd had conversations with someone who really understood me and cared and really wanted to hear what I had to say, and I had always had a crush on you, so good Christian boy that you were.
On the outside.
Yeah. On the outside.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I remember just thinking, this is it. I've made it. I've made it to the promised land. I've gone through the fire, and now God is I'm reaping my reward. And it also fostered a real strong sense of I have to trust God in everything. And I believed that the only way to continue having these good things happen in my life was for me to just trust God in everything. And so, that kind of, that informed a lot of my decision making.
Mm-hmm.
That ended up being pretty difficult for both of us.
So God had been good to you, so you're going to basically pay God back for that goodness, and you're going to trust him with everything. Right.
Well, I believed that I had trusted in him through the hard times, and things were getting better now, and so I just trusted that God, I really believed it with all my heart, that God would take care of me. It didn't matter what difficulty came my way.
So was it more of a, and I could be reading into this looking back, so go ahead and correct me, but was it more like a God will take care of me, or God will provide me the strength to be able to do the things I need to do on my own and pick myself up by my own bootstraps and go do what I need to do in life? Or was it like I can just like rest and know that God's just going to take care of everything? Yeah, I think and it's kind of insidious actually. I think it's the second. I think I when you go through that kind of trauma as a child, you develop a sense of learned helplessness, and you really don't feel like you have much power or control over your own life. And I think I definitely brought that into my young adulthood. Mm-hmm. Just believing that nothing was in my control. I had to trust God in everything. He was the one who needed to have all, say in my life. And so, that was really difficult for when we were dating. It was... What was difficult about it?
Well, when you're 17, 18, 19, and you're dating.
An extremely handsome man.
Yeah. Another thing that, you're not supposed to do is you're not supposed to kiss your boyfriend or be intimate in any way. And so we were dating. We were together for 2 years, and it was really difficult. It was it was an ongoing battle, and we both would make a mistake and then feel terrible about it, and and then we would go a while without, doing anything but holding hands, and then we would make a mistake, and at one point I actually called off our wedding about a couple months before our wedding, because we just couldn't keep our hands off each other, and I really believed that we had to do it God's way, or else we would not be blessed.
What's God's way?
Is just not touching each other, I guess. Which is really...
Well, what's really funny, just to give context from my perspective, is as a young man going through church, like, I remember all the discussions about, there was kind of this, and there would sometimes be discussions in youth group about this type of thing, like, holding hands seems okay. Maybe kissing's okay, but there was this phrase that is ridiculous, and I think it's so embarrassing to even say it. But they, the line they would always say was heavy petting.
What does that mean?
So like maybe you start to kind of rub each other a little bit, kind of heavily, I guess. I don't know. Like,
so confusing.
So things are getting kind of escalated when you're just kissing or something.
Right.
It's going to the next level. So there was kind of in my mind like okay, there's this really gray area where am I just holding her while I'm kissing her?
Right.
Or am I like holding her while I'm kissing her? It'll be like really, so it's really confusing. So then if we felt like, or if you felt like we crossed the line, or I crossed the line because I was like,
petting a little too heavily.
Yes. Then we felt like we sinned and we had to repent, and and that would happen over and over.
Right.
I mean,
because
in our relationship.
Yeah.
And so while we were dating, we dated for 2 years. Yeah. So,
Well, we were dated for a year, and then we were engaged for a year.
Yeah. So in that time frame, once we got engaged, then you called off the wedding at some point, and in that time, and we eventually though got back together. Yeah,
we did, and we got married. And I think there was always part of me that was worried about that. Like, we didn't do it the right way.
Mm-hmm. And you were even told by a person in the church that was close to us that they thought God did not want me to be your husband.
Yes.
Because I was too,
I don't know, hot-blooded male.
Yeah.
Which is funny because we were kind of like rock stars considering how long we were together, and it never got, we didn't go all the way.
Right. At least,
until
at least up until the last moment. I don't know.
Yeah. But I mean, we worked really hard at that. It was a struggle. But so I remember being told that, and I think I knew you were so genuine, and you were a good person, and you loved God, and I just remember thinking, I don't know, I went back and forth. I'd feel a lot of guilt and shame about it, and then I would think, no, but he's such a good person, and there was part of me that was like, that's not cool. He was the, pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, like I earned this dude. I went through all that. I deserved to be in a good relationship with him, and I just thought, I remember at that point just thinking, that's not cool, God. But then I also thought, if I have to give him up, I will. I can't have an idol. I can't have someone I care about more than God. And so I think that's why I called off the wedding.
Yeah.
But we worked it out, and we, stayed engaged and got
repented.
Married. Yes, you repented.
Which meant I would never do that again.
Never.
Until we got married.
Right.
I would never do it again without your full participation. Let's put it that way.
It wasn't very hard to get me to participate either. But so we finally got married, and I was like, whew, finally, which is why Christians get married at 19.
One reason, sure.
It's one reason, yeah.
Because they don't want to be in a sinful lifestyle, and they know that they can't live, celibate, just hold hands and
and
kind of a relationship for years. And we can't live together. So
we had a really close friendship. We were really good friends, and we cared about each other a lot. And I think we knew each other really well. We really loved each other. I think we were a good match. So I think with that, I just didn't think that. It just didn't make sense to me that we weren't meant to be together. Yeah,
because we were good friends from the time I was 16, you were probably 14. Mm-hmm. We were pretty close friends, like from that point until when we got married. I mean, we're still good friends, but what I mean is like we were friends from that point until we got married. So I mean, we got married at 21 and 19, so that's 5 years, of pretty good friendship turning into a relationship and then marriage. So there was an established real strong relationship there, so it made sense. So when this person said that, it confused you maybe a little, and then our behavior was confusing because you felt like we were in sin, and but ultimately, you know, you kind of felt like, okay, no, this is the right thing to do, to get married. Yeah. Okay, well, I guess take me into the next phase. I'm, you know, a lot of times I just jump into the questions and doubts right now, but I feel like there's kind of a lot that happens in our life in between that time.
Right.
For people who may not have heard my episode, or who, you know, I guess, who will hear, you know, that part of our life again, there's a lot of important things that happened from the time we got married, you know, on. So before the doubts started creeping in. So, yeah, so what?
So one important thing I think that really cemented, I guess, our life path was my firm belief that you have to trust God in everything. I believed that you had to trust God in family planning. And so when we first started having conversations around birth control and what method we would use, I remember, you know, I told you I don't think that that's right. I think that that's not trusting God. And so we early on knew we were just, you know, you started researching, studying the Bible, seeing what the Bible had to say about it. And of course the Bible is very pro have lots of children.
Yeah.
And so we, and I remember being pretty scared that the prospect of just having kids for the rest of, you know, my, you know, being perpetually pregnant until I couldn't be anymore. It was a scary prospect, but I really did believe that I had to trust God in everything, in our finances and in everything. And so we got pregnant right away.
You know, before you jump into that, I actually thought of something that I think kind of is important to give people an idea of like how this decision-making process was playing out in our lives. So I remember, and I'll never forget this talk with you that we had, and it was, our wedding was coming pretty quick. It was, I think, within months, you know, or weeks or something. It was coming, and we were, you know, I felt real strongly the closer we got to marriage, I felt more and more convinced that not using birth control was the right way to go, biblically. But like you said, you know, the prospect of having babies the rest of your life until you couldn't have babies anymore was terrifying on one hand to you, even though on the other hand you're trying to trust God. But I remember sitting at a table with you, and you were having a lot of doubts about it, and you were really struggling, and you were actually in tears, and you didn't want to do it. You wanted to use birth control. It was intense, you know, and it was back and forth, and we were using the Bible to try to justify and understand what God wanted, and but you were in tears, and you nearly said, I can't do it. You did, in fact, and then at the end of the day, it was, okay, let's trust God.
Right.
Thanks for listening to part 1 of my interview with Krissy. Be sure to tune in for part 2, where Krissy discusses how she managed raising 2 young children born back-to-back, and the prospect of having endless children, and what eventually led to Krissy becoming an atheist.
Thanks for listening to Voices of Deconversion. Be sure to join us next time by subscribing to the podcast. If you'd like to learn more, check out our newsletter at bodpodcast.com.